Laughing Loon presents Building Ootek, Part 4. The kayak pictured here is Ootek, designed and being built by Rob Max. The building shown here is a condensed version of the more detailed information in my instruction books and how-to videos available on my website. In Part 3 of Building Ootek, we finished stripping the hull, and we scraped off the hot glue beads and got rid of all the carpenter's glue. In Part 4, we'll sand the hull, apply a seal coat, we'll lay out fiberglass and wet that out, and finally we'll add fill coats. I rough sand with a random orbital sander using 60 grit sandpaper. Work in small circles with the random orbital sander. Look very carefully at the rough surface and work on a small area, and when that is a uniform matte surface, move on. The key to using the random orbital sander is to actually hold it lightly. Let the grit and the disc speed do the work instead of pressing hard. This will allow the sander to follow the natural fair curves of the hull very easily. When you've sanded the whole hull to a uniform matte surface with 60 grit, wet the wood down very thoroughly with a wet sponge to raise the grain and reveal any flaws. Then go over the whole surface with 120 grit to remove the 60 grit cut marks and create a new, smoother, uniform matte surface. Go over the surface again with a damp sponge to reveal any cut marks that are left. Mark them with a pencil, and then go over the whole surface with 220 grit in preparation for its seal coat. Finally, sand the wood with 220 grit. If there are any spots with pencil marks where cut marks are that don't disappear quickly with a 220, go over with 120 grit and the sanding block, and then go over with random orbital sander and 220. I wasn't entirely happy with the color of the wood, so I applied some wood dye, which is not a stain. Dye allows the grain to show through much better. The dye looks a little stranger when it's dried. It looks much better when it's wet out with epoxy. I had to scrape the dye off the light-colored detail stripes to reveal them. Now I'm applying a seal coat of epoxy to the wood by itself. This will allow the wood to absorb all the resin it needs without struggling with the fiberglass, also trying to absorb resin. Then go over the surface with a foam brush to tip off any bubbles or runs or drag and just smooth the surface out. Once the seal coat is tack-free, you can lay your fiberglass cloth over the surface. I align one edge of the 60-inch wide 4-ounce S-glass with the shear line of one side of my boat so that I can use the cutoff piece in other parts of the hull. As you can see, aligning the opposite edge of the 60-inch glass with the shear line gives me a very large piece which I can use on the hull interior. I smooth out the cloth by brushing it on the bias with a wide brush. Larger wrinkles can be smoothed out by hand. I mix small batches of 6 ounces of epoxy. My shop, my epoxy, everything is at about 85 degrees to keep the epoxy as thin as possible to wet the glass out thoroughly. I start out in the center bottom of the hull and roll toward one stem. I roll in one direction on the bias to keep from lifting the glass. I roll the epoxy on quickly and let it have time to absorb. After I work on the bottom, I come down the sides, holding my tray underneath to catch any drips. Then I go over the surface with a roller, not adding new resin, but rolling out wet spots and filling in dry spots. Finally, I go over the surface with a squeegee to remove excess resin. The squeegeed surface has a uniform matte look to it. Thin resin will wet your glass out transparently and allow the removal of excess resin with a squeegee to keep your layup as lightweight as possible. After the wet out is tack-free, I apply the first fill coat. The rough surface of the fiberglass can easily generate foam. To combat this, I apply my first fill coat using warm temperatures again and resin with slow hardener. The key to having the roller cover not produce foam is to pour your mixed epoxy over the roller cover in the roller tray before you use it to allow the roller cover to absorb resin and displace the air in the roller cover. Go over the fill coat with a foam brush to tip off the surface, smoothing out any drips or runs, breaking bubbles. Sometimes you even have to coax the epoxy into the surface if it doesn't want to coat uniformly. I apply 2 more fill coats at 72 degrees using a medium hardener. I'll trim the glass hanging past the shear line. Once the final fill coat is tack-free, I'll remove the hull from the strong back and put it on supports so I can work on the deck. I removed the L brackets which held the stations to the strong back. I mark both sides of the station locations in the hull because they'll be tacked back in to strip the deck. I knock out the stations with a firm wrap from a dead blow mallet. This cleanly breaks the stations free from the hot glue. In part 5 of building Ootek, we'll tack the stations at the shear line only back in the hull and prepare to strip the deck. For more information on my strip building techniques, see my shop tips pages at laughingloon.com. Full plans for the Sea Kayak Ootek, along with many other canoe and kayak plans, instruction books, and how-to videos are available at my website, laughingloon.com.